One of my great mottos is yesterday is not today, today is not yesterday. And this serves to remind us that we need to keep things fresh. We need to keep things lively and alive and moving in our life. And it's very, very easy to fall into the trap of stagnation, where things become the same, followed by more of the same, followed by more of the same, followed by more of the same. One of my great principles in acting is the principle of variety, changing it up, keeping it lively, keeping it different, putting in some different stuff. You know, this line is not the same as this other line. This part of the scene is not the same as this other part of the scene. A commitment to evolution, a commitment to keeping things alive and moving in that forward direction. And one of the big traps that we can fall into as human beings is this idea of today is basically a repeat or a rerun of yesterday. It's just more of the same, more of the same, more of the same, more of the same. And many people will say this, in fact. I feel like, didn't I do this already? Didn't I already live this day? It's kind of the same day, the same week, the same month, the same year, over and over and over and over again. And we want to break out of that. We want to keep our thinking fresh. We want to move into new territory, try new things, keep things alive, keep it lively, keep it moving, keep the changes coming. And one thing I think we need to be aware of as human beings is the extent to which we tend to see things and experience things through the lens of the past. We become habituated to certain things. We certainly can become conditioned. We can be subject to conditioning of all sorts. And we are subject to certain imprints that get made on us. This becomes very obvious when you are working with people who have certain phobias. A person may have had a traumatic experience when they were 4 or 5 years old, and now at the age of 37, they have a fear response, they have an anxiety response that's totally rooted in that early experience, even though they may not consciously remember that experience. It nonetheless has affected and colored their whole experience of something way past the point where it has really any relevance at all. And in fact, that original fear may have been based on an error. They may have perceived a danger or a threat when in fact there was none. And it really is amazing how we can be affected by past experiences. This is why I say we're kind of always seeing things and experiencing things through the lens of the past. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing. After all, we learn things, we learn good things in the past, and we can build on the experiences of the past. This is why we don't want to forget yesterday. We just want to remind ourselves that today is not yesterday. It may be in some ways a continuation of yesterday, but it's not a repeat of yesterday. It's a new deal, in other words. And this is something that I strive to do when I work with people who do suffer from phobias and whatnot, is help them to break from the past and help them to gain that new perspective on things. Another one of my mottos is today is do something different day. Today is the day that you break out of those old patterns, you try something new, you try something different. It could be something big, it could be something small. The main thing that we want is we want to avoid getting into too much of a pattern to the point where we're not thinking very much at all anymore. In fact, I think one of the best things we can do sometimes is to give ourselves a kind of amnesia. Now, not permanent amnesia, but a kind of temporary amnesia, where we say to ourselves, in effect, okay, yesterday was great, it was fantastic. Now, what if yesterday had never happened? How would I see things? How would I perceive things today? And you can say this about yesterday, you can say this about last year, you can say this about the last 5 years of your life. What if you had right now suddenly no recollection of the last 5 years of your life or the last 10 years of your life? What if you suddenly woke up and the last 10 years of your life had not happened, you had no memory of them whatsoever, how would your perception of things be different? How would you see things differently? How would you experience things differently? Something I often ask of people who will say that they're depressed. People will say, I'm experiencing depression. And you ask them, you say, well, how long have you had depression? And they'll say, oh, I've experienced depression for the last 25 years of my life. And I'll say, and you're depressed today? And they'll say, yes. And I'll say, okay, now imagine if for the last 24 years, 364 days, you had not had depression at all. It was totally unknown to you. Can you conceive of yourself being depressed today? They think about it and they say, no, I really can't. I can't imagine that if I had not been depressed for the last 25 years, that I would be depressed today. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that realization, because it means that your depression today, in large part, is a kind of continuation. It's a continuation of something from the past. But why? Why does it have to be? Again, if you hadn't had the depression for the past 24 years, 364 days, and you wouldn't be depressed now, well, then it means that the depression is not necessary. You don't have to be depressed. You are depressed, but it's not so much because of what's happening in your life right now, it's because of what you have experienced in the past, and in large part, your depression has become a kind of a bad habit. And this is what depression is for a lot of people. This is what anxiety and fear is for a lot of people. I've said this to people sometimes, again, who have phobic responses. I'll say, I think to a large extent, not entirely perhaps, but to some extent, your fear has become a kind of a bad habit. It may have had some kind of relevance at one point in your life, but today you can see that it really doesn't serve any positive purpose. And it's like a bad habit that you just have not managed to get rid of yet. So that's often one of the angles that I like to take in working with a person with a phobia, is looking at it just like a bad habit that needs to be broken. And this, again, is an important thing to understand about our minds. Our minds become habituated. We get used to things. We get so used to things in some cases that we don't even notice things anymore. It's not such a big thing anymore, but once upon a time, people used to smoke cigarettes. In some cases, people would just chain smoke cigarettes, one after the other, after the other, after the other. Now, you cannot chain smoke cigarettes day in and day out for years and years of your life and be conscious of what you're doing. At some point, it just becomes an automatic, rote kind of experience. And sometimes people who smoke will say, I'm halfway through the cigarette before I realize I've even put it in my mouth. It's totally become automatized for me at this point. I reach for the pack, I pull the cigarette out, I put it between my lips. I could be totally focused on something else. I'm talking to somebody, I'm watching TV or whatnot, and I'm not even aware that I'm doing it because I've done it so many thousands of times in the past that it's become essentially unconscious for me. I don't even realize that it's happening until maybe I'm already partway through it, or maybe I don't even notice it at all. And this, again, can be okay. I mean, I'm walking right now. I'm really not conscious of walking. I'm not conscious of where I'm putting my foot exactly. It's become very, very automatized, and that's okay, that's fine. But it is good every now and then to revisit things in your life, again, to give yourself that kind of amnesia. Of course, sometimes people do get amnesia in one way or another. For example, somebody who's been in a bad accident might have to literally learn how to walk again. And people will say it's a really rather profound experience to have to learn how to put one foot in front of the other and keep yourself up and not fall over, especially when you've been doing it for years and years and years. But it's almost like all that's been erased and now I have to start from scratch and learn how to do it all over again. But this can be good if we do it willingly, if we're in control of the process, and if we can say, okay, let's imagine now, even though I know I have expert level knowledge and understanding of a certain topic. What if I knew nothing about this? What if I could forget everything that I think I know about this? If you could do that, at least temporarily, then what you really could do is take that fresh look at something. And this is at the root of all genius, all great innovations. It's the ability to take an absolutely new look at something. Of course, not just forgetting your own thoughts about it or your own insights or your own understanding that you think you have, but also in effect forgetting the whole kind of cultural perspective or the general consensus on something and saying, okay, let's set all that aside, let's forget it, in other words, for a little while, and let's take a totally new look at the subject. If you can do that, you can discover new things. This is called thinking outside the box. This is called breaking out of those old patterns and those old ways. Let me just add that many people find this very difficult to do, and many people are very frightened by this. This is why innovators often are so vehemently opposed, because this person now is challenging and questioning the status quo and in effect causing people to have to do this kind of rethinking, and they don't want to have to do it. They say, no, our thinking is done on this subject. We're not interested in any new insights or any new way of looking at things. So the person who develops this and the person who makes this into a regular kind of way of life is often very different from the mainstream, to say the least. So those are some thoughts that I have. You tell me what you think. Leave a comment. I will talk to you later.